Welcome to a special edition of the Golf Intervention Podcast. If you were tuning in for the first time, we want to welcome you. My name is Eric Layton, and I'm here with my co-host Rob Fales, and we're excited that you're tuning in today. Whether you are a weekend warrior looking to shave a few strokes off your handicap or a competitive player striving for excellence, join us as we explore the science, strategies, and secrets behind improving at the game of golf. It is now time for your golf intervention. On today's episode, we are honored to have Dr. Sasho MacKenzie as our guest, renowned as one of the foremost golf researchers in the world. With groundbreaking research that revolutionizes how we perceive and instruct the game, Sasho has challenged traditional doctrines and reshaped our understanding of skill improvement. He is the visionary behind the Stack speed training system and serves as an ambassador consultant for the leading brands like Ping and FootJoy. Join us as we delve into his insights and discoveries that continue to redefine the boundaries of golf performance. Welcome, Sasho. We're so excited to have you on today.
Awesome. I'm excited to be here. Excited to talk to you folks.
We're now on episode 20. We've done, you're now our third interview. We had Mark Sweeney on last time from Aim Point, which was really nice. A fun episode. And we got a lot of great feedback, and we're like, man, if Sasho comes on, that'd be really, really fun. Huge influence on me. I know, huge influence on Robbie, although we've never met till 5 minutes ago on this Zoom-style podcasting app. But I wanted to kind of let the listener kind of get a vision, sort of see through my lens of how Sasho has affected me as a golf instructor. And then we'll let you talk a lot because people aren't tuning into this to listen to Robbie and I as much, but they want to hear from you. So I've been teaching golf for almost 25 years. And it's been really awesome, but I kind of see it through this lens of like back in the day when I was first learning golf. I'm 45 years old. I was trying to learn golf, and you were probably the same age, roughly, trying to learn golf at the same time. This is early 90s kind of stuff. Learning golf back then was a little bit interesting because we didn't even really use video. We were just out on the range. We were swinging. We were hitting. We had no modeling of swings. We didn't have launch monitors. We had basically nothing. We had our intuitions of the people helping us. We just tried to do it on our own. And then it kind of got into like, we're using video, and everything kind of was seen through a two-dimensional lens in my assessment, right? So a lot of the discussion was around swing plane and all this stuff, and then you had like the one-plane golf swing, and you had some models of swing instruction through books or through instructors that were trying to teach the game. And here I am as a young person. I'm trying to learn all this. It's kind of this is pre-TrackMan, by the way, which we talk a lot about on this show. So I remember I was on social media somewhere, and some smart instructor that I don't remember who it was posted a link to a video and said, this might be the most important link that you could click and watch that's ever been produced in golf instruction. I thought, whoa, I'm going to click on this thing. And it was you and Chris Como. It looked like maybe in a lobby of a hotel. I have no idea.
Oh, yeah. I know what video you're talking about. Yeah.
Where y'all filmed this, but it was the first time I had heard any discussion. I mean, I had taught tens of thousands of lessons at this point, right? And first time I'd ever heard any discussion of like force and torque and all this type of stuff. We'll get into the nitty gritty of this in a little bit, but I remember listening to it and thinking of all of a sudden I'm thinking of golf in a three-dimensional way. As opposed to a two-dimensional way. And this was the first sort of convention. I had to be hopefully growth-minded in the moment. We just did an episode on mindset. And nice. I'm glad I've always been growth-minded because when I watched it, I thought, okay, that's different than anything I've ever thought or taught or tried to do as a player. And it didn't take me long to say, I think those guys are right. I need to learn a little bit more about that. And so that's convention one destroyed, like this on-plane kind of swinging stuff, right? We'll let you describe this a little bit later. Second thing I saw from you that I can remember, because I'm going back in time, was a video that you did with Golf Science Lab or somebody talking about gaining swing speed, and you taught them to swing the backswing faster. Okay? And I was like, whoa, that's weird, dang if it didn't work, right? So that was cool. People should check these. Maybe we'll link these videos if I can find them on the podcast. And then obviously the stack system, right? Like this is kind of the next thing I'm seeing. Your work with Matthew Fitzpatrick, really cool. And we want to get into that a little bit today for sure. So this is my lens as someone who teaches golf. I teach all levels of player, from current tour player to complete beginner and 4-year-old kids. And I think that being growth-minded and being open-minded and then seeing this research, and when I wrote this intro, it was like, I wanted to make you sound really good. But at the same time, it's true. Like, I think your research, and we're going to get into this, but it just sort of like is very open to, hey, you know what? I'm going to try to figure out anything that can help people play better golf. That's the way I see it. So
that's my philosophy.
Welcome to the show, by the way. And I think that was, I kind of wanted the listener who has gotten used to hearing me from now, but to kind of see my lens through how I've seen Sasho. And when people ask me like, hey, where can I get good information? I'm like, Sasho. It's a pretty easy answer. I think some of the smartest people I know in the game, they go to you for their information. So we're glad to have you on. Robbie, I'm going to throw it to you real quick because I know you want to ask Sasha a couple questions here to kind of get us started. So go ahead. Give it to him. Yeah, I know you got a lot. But remember,
Doctor, we've lucky to know each other for a little while, so he knows how I am with questions. So the last time we saw each other was actually in the airport going to coach camp. Hunter Brown and I ran into you just randomly at the airport. And we had a great conversation, and we were on our way to Andrew Rice's coach camp, where I tell people, and your presentation has influenced my coaching so much, that is how much you blew up so many conventions in your presentation when it comes to putting. And so really giving the listener context, this interview is essentially kind of in the middle of our mental game series, quote unquote mental game. We don't like that word. But a big part of the mental game is what information has just gotten passed down over long periods of time that people just believe are true, and it really drives a lot of their behaviors. So I know as a putting coach, I had to look a lot of my behaviors kind of in the mirror and say, oh, after this presentation, how is this really going to change what I do? And it has. It's really changed the way I teach putting, and it's been so good. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of coloring that in for the listener, what was your presentation on at Coach Camp? What was really the main point that you were making for all of us coaches? And then what do you think the golfer could really get from what you did your work on it and presented at Coach Camp?
Yeah, so I presented on putting, kind of a general overview of putting, and the focus was, well, what should people be doing when they practice their putting? Okay, you've got 15 minutes a couple times a week. What should you be working on? And then looking at going into a detailed rationale behind why I think those are the things that you should be working on, and kind of eliminating things that probably aren't going to move the needle. And the way I look at it, the way I frame it is, putting's about being repeatable, trying to act on your intentions. You have a putt, you get to read the putt, right? And you decide on how hard you're going to hit the ball and in what starting direction. Okay, so right away, starting from there, you see there's an importance of reading the green. And so if you took a tour player and you brought them into my lab and you said, hey, here's an 8-foot putt, and we could give it maybe it's 2 cups outside right. They might miss the first one, but then they're going to proceed to sink 95 out of 100 of the next putts from that 8-foot, right? But yet on tour, they're only about 50%. PGA Tour player from 8 feet. So there's your first clue that green reading is massive. You look at it and you go, how hard should I hit this? And I'm a firm believer that reading the speed is way more important than reading the line. And a lot of times we'll even get the speed wrong, whether we read it wrong or execute wrong, and we'll blame it on line, because if the putt has a break, it might miss left or right because the speed is not correct, but we go, oh, I didn't hit my line. So right away, you should be doing a lot of things in your practice that help green reading. And aim point's a great system, so could be learning aim point, but beyond that, it's even when I work with players and maybe their putting stats aren't great, one of the first questions I ask is, how many unique putts do you hit in a putting session? You know, if you putt for half an hour, how many different putts did you hit? Where you're forced to, hey, I have to read this. You know, it's a new putt. I need to consider the speed. I need to consider the line. And then hopefully, if you're practicing effectively, you've said, hey, did I get the read right? Or did I, mishit it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah. Hey,
No question.
I hit this as intended. Oh, it didn't go in. You know, I hit my line, executed my speed. If someone blindfolded me, I'd say that's going in the hole. And I look up and I go, shoot, it didn't go in. Well, I misread it. Yep. So you should be seeing a lot of different putts. To me, that's the biggest take home. And then I argue that beyond reading the green, the most important thing is getting the ball going with the intended speed. So even if let's say you read it right, then it becomes, can I get the ball launching on my intended speed? You know, just to get, let's say it's a putt where you want to launch the ball at 5 miles an hour. Not that people think of miles per hour, right? But okay, we know that if I hit this ball at 5 miles per hour, it's going to go in the hole. Assume I get the correct line as well. Well, what goes into my ability to generate that intended 5 mile per hour ball speed, right? And it comes down to how fast the putter is moving, your repeatability of putter head speed. Path, face angle, and impact spot don't really matter that much. So that's a big one, right? I rule out right away, it doesn't really matter where you hit the ball on the face, okay?
Let that sink in, everyone.
Yeah.
Doctor, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter where you and let me put this in context. So
yes.
You need to look at, when you're looking at a variable in putting, there's the physics. Okay, so I can take a putting robot and I can have the exact same swing but just change where it hits on the face. I've done this research. There's a putting coach in Europe who's been doing this stuff for 20 years. He published some great papers. Carlson's his last name, Carlson and Nielsen. They've done some putting stuff, but this isn't new. There's lots of sources. They found that, hey, even if you take a typical blade style putter, for every centimeter you miss the center of the face, you are going to get I might get these backwards, a 2% error in rollout distance and a 1% error in lateral distance. So if it's a 12-foot putt, 144 inches, you can say if you miss by a centimeter, then you can express it in terms of inches that the rollout distance is going to be affected, 2% of 144, and lateral distance. Long story short, so I can sum this up, for a 12-foot putt, you need to be 1.1 centimeters outside the sweet spot in order to miss it. Okay, so that's one thing. That's the physics, and you'd say, well, that does matter then. Shoot, I can't hit it under the toe. I'll miss the putt. Okay, but then you have to look at what is a golfer's variability in hitting the center of the face. And I have all sorts of putters that come into my lab, and the worst putters rarely, like the worst, like you're a 25 handicap putter, they're not missing the center of the face in that 12-foot putt by 1.1 centimeters.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And then every once in a while, I think Hunter maybe posted this on Twitter. Hey, you see, I don't have time to argue with folks on Twitter a lot or on X, but they're like, no, it matters, blah, blah, blah. Look, you've got this study by Carlson. I've done it in my lab with a putting robot. Ping has tons of data. That's one of the ways they test putters. They're very precise. They go in quarter-inch increments. They hit a whole bunch of balls. They've got this great granite slab. And, it just, you have to get so far out from center for it to start mattering that it doesn't matter. Now, at some point you might say, yeah, but, we get down to inches and rollout distance, maybe it matters. Then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the variability in someone's ability to generate the intended putter head speed, right? And it is washing out the variability in impact spot, right? So if you're trying to generate, if you're trying to get the ball launching at 5 miles per hour, but because of your variability, your ability to hit that ball with the intended speed the putter head wants to travel at, and it's, you know, 0.2 miles per hour slower or 0.2 miles per hour faster, that's affecting the ball way more than where you hit on the face, in terms of the variability of those things. So when it comes to practice, you know, should you be doing things to try and grind to make sure you're hitting out of the center of the face? No, because it's not going to move the needle. Right. You need to be doing things to make sure you're gauging, you know, your ability to control the speed of the putter head. That's so it's and then you know, another one that people can get kind of cranky about is stroke path. You know, so you grinding on your stroke path to make sure that your path is zero or something close to zero at impact. Well, for that 12-foot putt, you need to be plus or minus 3.5 degrees of stroke path to miss it. And again, no one's path is that bad.
Right. No one.
And what you have, there's a lot of good golf coaches out there who have a SAM, right? And they measure this stuff on golfers, but what they don't do is, and I don't blame them, they don't go to the next step. Both of you probably have SAM and probably have collected tons of data.
Yep.
But this isn't your job. It's my job as a researcher to say, right, well, let's take, so I have, you know, hundreds of golfers that have come into the lab, and I can say, right, what is Robbie's variability in impact spot, putter head speed, face angle, and stroke path? What about Eric's? What about Sasho's? What about everybody else that comes into the lab? And then you can do these correlations, right? So you can just to get a sense on what's important. Hey, let's look at impact spot variability. So I'll have someone come into the lab and they'll hit an 8-foot putt. Then they'll walk over and hit a 10-foot putt. Then they'll hit a 12-foot putt, hit a 20-foot putt, come back and hit the same 8-foot putt again. And they'll do each of those putts, say, 12 times. They know on that 8-foot putt or that 12-foot putt, they know the break. They know everything about it. There's very little green reading error left. So I can go, right, what is Robbie's path variability on this 8-foot putt, right, over those 12 attempts? What's Eric's? So I get a measure of your variability, right? When you're coaching, you're not going through that. That's not great for making someone a better putter, but it's data you need. So then I can go, hey, what's the correlation? And then I'm also tracking, they might over 2 days hit 96 putts. I'm tracking how many putts they sink. And I've even got a measure whether we could have two people that everybody sinks the same 8-foot putt, right? Because it's easy. But I can quantify how close you came to sinking every putt with the optimal speed and how close it was to the center of the hole. So you could have two people that sink all their putts, and I can still tell you which person's a better putter. So then you do a correlation. What's the correlation between impact spot variability and number of putts sank over a couple of days? Fuzz. What about face angle? Face angle variability, very high.
Huge.
Impact spot variability, nothing. Path variability, nothing. Face angles, big. Speed, massive. And not just variability in speed, but also getting the correct speed. So what's your mean speed? So the best putters tend to have a speed that will launch the ball on average about 17 inches past the hole in my lab. So it's the tightness of speed, but it's also is your average speed appropriate for that hole?
Yeah.
Whereas you see lots of people, Brad Faxon comes to mind, someone that might have mismatched face to path at impact, right? Just as an example, I pull him up because he sets up a little funny. I shouldn't say that. I do not know what his impact values are, but in terms of setup, he sets up open and closes it, or vice versa. There's lots of ways you can get the ball going towards the hole. You could have a path that's 3 right, but your face is a little bit open, cancels out, and the ball starts on line. Might seem suboptimal, but
if you can repeat it, that's the key.
If you can repeat it, that's what matters. And I talked a bit about. There's so many interesting ones. Whether you should get the ball rolling quickly, right? So that's another one where as long as you generate a consistent level of backspin, it probably shouldn't matter that much, and I like
it. Yeah.
So I like to. There's also been lots of research in this. I cite 3 studies all the way back to Cochran and Stobbs, 1968 Search for the Perfect Swing, where they had all hit putts with topspin, backspin, a whole bunch of different things. They all have the same consistency and rollout distance. Werner and Grieg changed loft. Cochran and Stubbs changed attack angle. Ping did a study. And there's not really anything that comes out there. And then, I like to use the thought experiment of, right, so if backspin's bad, right, that leads to higher variability, how are we ever able to hit a 58 or a 60-degree wedge anywhere near a hole, right? So a putt that might be bad is generating like 20 RPMs of backspin, or 30, might be 60 would be off the charts. Well, you could bring Jason Day out to the green, give him a 40-foot putt, and say, right, let's hit 20 putts to that hole. Give him his 58-degree wedge where he's generating like thousands of RPMs of spin. And if you had him hit, a bunch with a yellow ball and a bunch with a white ball, it'd be fuzz, right?
Yeah.
From 40 feet, you'd be like, yeah, nice clean lie, tons of spin. In fact, with wedges, we almost consider spin to add control.
Yeah.
In a way, right? Yeah. So you go, well, if going from 0 to 1,000 RPMs really doesn't blow up variability and outcome, you're not hitting these pitches way offline, or distance control isn't terrible, you'd be expecting Jason Day to hole a 40-foot little pitch,
Right.
Then why would you expect going from 0 to 20? Three studies done, fuzz, that thought experiment. It just, so then, and I'm open.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm probably going to, be not sold on someone that just says, yeah, but it matters. Okay.
Yeah. Right. And then the other one that I wanted to bring up when it comes to putting is acceleration, right? So at any point in the stroke, are you seeing any correlation in a golfer's acceleration profile and their putting competency?
No, I haven't. And I think, so that's another one that I'll be like, oh, cool. Hey, I've got these 50 decent golfers, but there's a variation in how many putts they sank. Let's look at their acceleration and impact and do a correlation, and I don't see it, whether it's, 0 or a little bit positive.
Have you also done transition as well? So like accelerate, well, I guess around transition.
Well, around transition, that's probably where acceleration would be the highest. But yeah, no, I don't see anything with tempo. There was a guy like Dave Pelz has in his book. The guy won the World Putting Championship putting with his he's got no arm, so he stood on one leg and putted with his foot, in the other leg.
Wow.
So now, I'm not saying that if you took somebody, like there's some, like I have 3 kids, 13, 11, and 8, and it doesn't hurt to like, hey, what if they're all hitchy and jerky, and you got to get them somewhere near something that's repeatable, and having a tempo that works for them, being able to repeat that tempo for them, whether it's fast or slow, probably is helpful. I think variability in general in putting is not great, so having the same setup every time is very helpful. But yeah, I don't see anything with tempo or acceleration. The theory behind acceleration is reasonable. It's that if we're trying to generate the same speed, and if you have 0 acceleration, then that means that the speed isn't changing. Right? So in theory, you're like, yeah, if at impact I want to have a consistent speed, then if my acceleration 0, if I hit it a little bit before, a little bit after, then my velocity won't change that much. But it's one of those things that sounds intuitive in paper, but if you start asking some other questions, maybe it doesn't hold a lot of water. Like, what are the odds that that's temporarily, the stroke's going to be messed up, where I'm actually going to hit it, before or after, to even give acceleration a time to really change things. So if you took a putting stroke and someone was 0 acceleration at impact, right, and you said, okay, let's measure your repeatability in terms of velocity to impact, and you have a standard deviation of those velocities if they're trying to hit the same putt. Now let's go back in time in the stroke to find when acceleration was higher, right? So the putter would be moving slower, but let's say acceleration is higher at that point. Well, let's measure the velocities at those times. They should be just as repeatable.
That's a good
even
point.
a little more repeatable.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
If we've got this acceleration curve going down to 0, then whatever if the velocity is repeatable there, it should be repeatable before that. And that, yeah.
So I think that's
Question.
Someone just needs to show me a graph. Hey, here's a correlation. It could be something in the way I'm collecting data in my lab. One study or one set of data doesn't prove anything. So I would love to see, hey, here are 40 golfers I measured, and here's a correlation between acceleration and impact and how many putts they sink. And I'd be like, okay, cool. I see it. You also, though, I'll throw a little caveat in there. You have to be careful that if those all come from one coach that coaches them all, I'm not coaching these people, right? They're coming in and they have a certain ability to measure them. But I might be doing other things as a coach, like making them practice or some other stuff that makes them better.
Yeah, exactly.
But this acceleration pattern might also go along with my coaching, right? Maybe I've taught them, because as a coach, you're like, okay, let's make you better at reading greens. Let's do a whole bunch of stuff to make you better. And also, I would really like you to have this acceleration pattern. So you've made them better, right? But, so you just, it would be better to take a cross section from a bunch of coaches, maybe try to find a coach that likes golfers to give it a little pop as well.
Yeah. So that's a good segue.
I was just going to ask a quick question.
Yeah.
Why do you think such a move towards high MOI putters? It seems to be the PGA Tour now more of these mallet style than blade style. I think it switched last year where it's actually more of those versus the blade style. Any scientific reason why you think that's happened? Is more of a feel for the players? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I haven't seen a ton. Certainly, if you hit it, there's going to be it doesn't affect launch angle that much, but there'd be a little bit more maintenance of ball speed. But God, I don't. That's not really such a big deal anyway. It's probably more of a feel thing with the stroke, so you can certainly the MOI of the mallet will interact differently with the forces and torques that the golfer is applying.
Got it.
There's probably more to do with the stroke than impact physics. And it could be that there's a lot of psychological confidence in looking down and seeing this giant thing, might help.
I think that's a huge part of it, in my opinion. Anyway, sorry to interrupt there, Rob. You had another question.
So we're going back to what actually matters, right? So the three things that you cited in your presentation were face angle and impact, putter head speed at impact, and your ability to read the green. So
those are wash out everything else. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, is there anything that you found that are long-time conventions that people have that, if dropping them, might reduce their variability or improve their variability of, say, club head speed at impact, say, club face angle at impact, right? So, one that I'm thinking is keeping your head down and keeping your eyes down, right? So, talk about kind of maybe some of the things that you found that have reduced some of the variability in the things that really matter.
Yeah, it's so tough to come up with. I'm not aware of any biomechanics that would with a putting stroke that would make it more repeatable. Is there a certain technique that would lead to better speed control or lower face angle variability? I'm not aware of it. I'm not even sure of a theory. I'm not. That seems like a really challenging thing to come up with. It might be out there. Hey, I'd love to dig in to try and figure out what that is. Someone would have to give me a really compelling theory behind why this technique would be better. To me, it mostly comes down to practice, right? Like. All you kind of have to do is look at all the variations in the way people putt, like grips, a different high putt. People putt with their feet open. Horschel, he doesn't even have his feet lined up. There's lots of people that are kind of open. Cantlay weirds me out, because he when he shifts his feet, like it looks like usually you're like, all right, I think I got my toes lined up to, or a line across toes is good, and then sometimes he'll his feet move massive amounts, and then he pulls the trigger. But practice. I think that that's going to be the biggest one. You want to get a more repeatable face angle. Something that's super boring but matters a ton, and I haven't published anything on this, but it's one of the most interesting things I've come up with in the last couple of years, is how much we are a slave to our setup and we don't know it. So I'll have, let's say Robbie comes in the lab and he's doing a study, and I have 12 attempts at the same 8-footer, okay? And so I'll plot Robbie's face angle as a function of his stroke, and I'll plot those 10 face angles, for that one putt. The curves, what's really interesting is they're all kind of separated a little bit. I would have expected to see he gets in there and, they kind of maybe start all at the same place because he's really good at getting set up. So I got face angle it's set up, and it's plus or minus 0.1 degrees or something. And then, and then they kind of all deviate as you get closer to impact. It's like they spread out or something, or maybe setup doesn't matter and your face is open 2 degrees for one, closed 2 degrees for another, but then they all arrive all tight. It's like, I don't care where I start. I'm going to, but it's like you went copy one curve and then shifted it up, copy, shifted it down. So where you started, where that face angle's pointing at address, it's almost like we got a little pendulum robot. That's what you are. In general, some of our strokes are pretty repeatable. Get in there and sit down, and then wherever you're aimed, you just execute. And this is the same putt, so there's nothing weird about it. People, you'd think they'd be able to get in there and line themselves up, have their feet down, but it's tough to see 1 or 2 degrees. So practicing, it's so boring, but practicing your setup to be consistent, all right, am I aimed where I think I'm aimed? That can be helpful. Whether the stroke is practicing to have the exact same stroke path, maybe not so much. There's a really cool Puttron thing. Jeff Leishman gave it to me, and it's there's beeps if you're pointing, if the face is pointing at where you think it's pointing, and kind of. Anyways, lots of little devices you can use for that. So are you setting up the same way every time? That would lead to less variability in face angle.
And maybe variability was the wrong word, but your ability to produce your intention when it comes to speed, and talk about some of the heads up, eyes down stuff that you've researched.
Well, there's a big one. Looking at the ball versus looking at your what I call the ball's the near target, and the far target is the spot on your intended start line. There's a line you want to launch the ball on. Where it passes closest to the hole, that's where I suggest people stare if they're putting it heads up. So you kind of look, if it's a straight putt, you look at the hole and you'd say, right, I'm going to roll this ball over the hole. So heads up or heads down doesn't really affect face angle variability or stroke path variability, but putter head speed variability decreases. And anybody at home can figure that out. If you got a garbage can around and you pick up a pen or something, you're like, right, I'm going to fire this in the garbage can. But I'm going to look down when I do it, right? If you're like, it feels really awkward because you're like, actually, I use this information immediately before I release it, right? I want to know how far that is away, and I gauge my effort based on that distance.
Yeah.
And without that, our ability to remember that distance decays exponentially. So even some of the best putters on tour, someone like an Aaron Baddeley, their stroke is starting as their head's coming back to the ball, because they want to keep that judgment of how far away the hole is. Certainly putting heads up reduces, putter head speed really. For 80% of the amateurs that come into my lab, they putt better heads up after just the kind of like a half-hour introduction. Now, a lot of tour players might have a really awesome ability to remember that distance. I'm sure some of them do. I'm sure some of them would see very marginal gains, if any, from putting heads up. But it's worth trying. For amateurs, it's definitely worth trying.
Oh
There's
my gosh,
so many benefits to putting heads up.
I can tell you, Hunter and I have been doing it for almost I want to say probably 2 years now, and it feels so wrong to look at the ball now when putting.
Yeah.
It feels like why on earth would I ever do this? It makes no sense, but that's what convention is. Convention is, hey, we got to look at the ball. No, you don't.
Yeah, no. And there's lots of, I like to take big picture, and so the few studies that I've done in the introduction, I talk about other sports, and there's sports that are a little bit removed, like basketball. You get to hold the ball. So you're like, but you definitely look at where you want to project this. Darts, you definitely look at the dartboard. But then you go, well, let's get a little closer to golf, where, if you're looking at like billiards or pool, the best billiards or pool players, they don't look at the cue ball. They're looking at where, and they've done this with eye trackers. They're like, okay, where, you don't watch the cue hit the white ball. They watch where they want the white ball to go. Hockey. No one looks down at the puck. Even at NHL defensemen now, when they're taking slap shots, are looking up. And that's the Connor McDavid. Unfortunately, they lost, but I don't think he has head down at the puck. Probably if he's on the ice for 40 minutes, it's 39 minutes, his head's up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sometimes can why people think like, oh, you're going to completely mishit it if you don't look at the ball. Well, the ball's not moving; it's there. Slopes always quite subtle. You get to set up the same way every time. All the information from the ball to the hole, that's what's important.
100%.
Put your head down and ignore that. There's a researcher by the name of Timothy Lee that did an interesting study looking at head movement. It's called allocentric head movement. So when the putter head moves back, your head tends to move forward a little bit for better putters. He found that to be a pattern. So when I looked at heads-up putting heads up, head movement was reduced, but the pattern became closer to what Lee said was maybe better, what better putters do.
That's pretty cool.
So you get less head movement putting heads up, which makes sense because you don't want to move your head because the ball's eventually going to come into view.
Right, you're going to be rotating your head there anyway, right?
Right, so just keep it there, hit the putt, so then you're not kind of moving your head up to see what's going to happen. And it really frees people up. There's no mechanical thoughts.
Oh my gosh, it's so great.
Try. You're looking at the ball and you're thinking, okay, I got to hit this, I got to square it up. Just try to get the ball started in that direction with the speed that's going to get it there.
I don't know if you've heard anyone doing this, but I'm weird sometimes. I will actually do it with greenside chips too. Like if I've got a chip like just off the green and it's basically a putting stroke, but it's obviously with a club that's got some loft, I will heads up a chip. Because it helps my speed that much. Yeah.
That seems reasonable to me. I think once you start to get funky lies or the ball's below your feet, which, where all of a sudden impact becomes way, way, way more important. Yeah. The precision of where that ball hits in the face, how much grass you get between the ball and the face, and there's some variability there. And then on full shots, there's no value because you're not trying to judge the distance. And range of motion becomes an issue. Some people have kind of sarcastically or facetiously asked me, "Oh, why don't you do that with your 5-iron?" Well, I'm not trying to judge distance with my 5-iron. I can, close my eyes or, hit into a screen, and because I know my 5-iron goes 205. So what? I'm not judging that. I just make my swing. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so moving on, going maybe now a little bit more away from putting, but still keeping with the idea of speed. So obviously with Stack System, you've learned a ton as far as how golfers produce speed, and I want to thank you for sharing the research that you did on kind of work and energy. And I want to talk about that graph that I've sent you multiple times asking you questions about.
Okay,
but really
before we get into that,
yes.
I will say, since you brought up the Stack System, Stack putting might be better than the speed. Because I designed Stack putting to basically cover the basis for what we just talked about. But sorry, go ahead.
Awesome, yeah.
Yeah, I like.
Hunter's been using it.
I've tested it. Yeah, it's good.
It's been really good. So talk about a big convention that I hear a lot and see a lot on the lesson tee is this idea of hitting a backswing position or hitting taking it slow back, right? So can you talk about why that might not be a great idea, and why recently, at least in the last 5-10 years, we've started to kind of debunk that convention, and what a golfer can benefit from maybe starting to look at the way that they produce energy in the full swing a little different way?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I'd like to think that's one thing that I've done with that paper and a lot of different presentations, is given some concrete concepts to the fundamentals of where club head speed comes from, and then you can, once you understand the fundamentals of what generates club head speed, then you can apply them to answer all sorts of questions, like the one you're asking me now. So, literally, if your club head's if your club head speed's 100 miles per hour, I measured your swing in my lab, I could calculate exactly where all those 100 miles per hour have come from. There's an equation, work and energy. The amount of speed in the club, it determines the amount of energy in the club at impact, and the amount of energy in the club is 100% determined by the work done. You've got some work done by gravity, which is tiny and doesn't matter. Work done by air resistance, which is very small and really doesn't matter unless you add some turbulators on there and gain 2 miles per hour for everybody. But it's not,
it's little
air
ping.
resistance is
nice.
not something you can try to do better from one swing to the next.
Yes.
Right? You can't use gravity better from one swing to the next, and even if you did, it's a minuscule amount. Yeah. So then you go, okay, well, the only other source of work that can be done on the club is from the golfer, and that's what's going to 100% determine the variability. If the three of us have different club head speeds, the work we do in the club determines that. And then you go, okay, well, what determines the work that a golfer does? There's 4 things. 2 of them go with linear work, and those are maybe the easiest to understand. Length of hand path on the downswing. The further your hands can travel, the point in the middle of the grip, further that can travel in the downswing, the more potential you have to generate club head speed. I always like to think about, an old manual car that you got to push to get going, and you get out. The further you have to push it, the faster the car is going to go. If you can only push a car for 2 feet, well, it's not going to get going that fast. If I can push it for 10 feet, I can get it going. But if I can push it for 20 feet, so the longer a distance I can apply force to something, the more I can add energy into that something. So longer hand path, average force in the direction you're pushing, So the harder I push from behind, if I push this car for 20 feet, more force that I apply, literally you can feel that, the harder I push in the direction the car is moving, the more a speed that car will have. Same with the golf club. Now, you could feel like you're applying more force, but it has to be in the direction that the grip is moving. Like if Eric and I were, pushing from behind, and we're like, Robbie, we need one more guy. And Robbie got out of the back seat, closed the back door, and started pushing 90 degrees to us on the back door. You're like, I'm working really hard. You're not helping us get the car going faster because that force isn't in the direction we're moving. And then we've got the torque, right? It's kind of like a pushing and pulling in the hands. If you were to scissor your hands like this, you would see the club kind of rotate. The torque you apply over the downswing, and the angle that it rotates through. Literally, if you're looking at a golfer face on, literally like a clock face, how much angle is that club rotating through? That's the easiest way to think of it. John Daly has a ton. Someone like J.B. Holmes, there's an older example. I can't think of anybody maybe more recent. Maybe John Rahm would be a good example of someone recent. Those two have extreme differences in the angle they rotated through. Yeah. So then once you know those 4 things and you understand, then you can go, right, well, how would having a slow backswing influence that? And if you wanted to get that car moving, if you only have 10 feet, that's your hand path length, right? You want to get that car moving as fast as possible in that 10 feet. If you started from 0 force, right? You had your hands in the back of the car and you were like, right, get going. Let's see how much force you can get. You wouldn't have as much force as if the car kind of rolled back into your hands a bit, right? Had a bit of speed. And then when you started pushing forward at the start of that 10 feet, you were already applying a high level of force. You get the car moving faster. A better example that I like to give is a nose flicking contest. Right?
I remember this one. This is great.
If Eric and I were going to have a nose flicking contest, and I said, Eric, you have to start with your finger like this. You can't pin it against your thumb, right? So you've got this distance to kind of move your finger before you hit my thumb. You can't get the finger going fast because it starts with a really low level of force, right? There's no tension in those muscles that are going to extend my finger. So I start moving, right, and the force is trying to get faster, but I can't do any work on that finger, and all of a sudden I've reached the nose, right? If I pin it with my thumb, now I've got an awful lot of force from that muscle in my forearm, right, that's going to flick my finger. So I start that movement at a high level of force.
Yeah.
So someone like Cameron Young, right, has to be an exceptional athlete and work really hard to go from a pause to 183 to generate 183 miles an hour ball speed. Right. He's working harder, than someone like Xander Schauffele or Rory, who has a pretty fast backswing, right? Yeah. And then if tour players give some clues, to the biomechanical principles at play, but if you really want to understand them, you need to look at the long drive guys because they have to maximize everything. No one in long drive looks like Cameron Young, right? They're whipping it back there because they want all those muscles that are going to apply force in the downswing direction. They want them ramped up really high at the start of the downswing, right? It's like pinning the finger. So could Cameron Young probably swing at 130 miles an hour with a faster backswing? Yeah, absolutely. Is that the best way for him to play golf? Maybe not. Hey, if he can make a slow, deliberate backswing, get to the positions you want, and still has the athletic ability to get 122 mile an hour clubhead speed, awesome. If you're, Brian Harmon, Colin Morikawa, maybe even, and you're like, all right, I'm trying to squeeze out an extra few miles an hour clubhead speed, you probably don't want to pause. That's one of the Matt has a magically fast transition, which is awesome. He's not the strongest dude in the world. Doesn't have a crazy long swing. Doesn't look like he swings with a ton of effort, but boy, does he take advantage of a fast backswing. To have all those muscles preloaded, the downswing muscles before he starts down.
Yeah. So it would seem to me to be pretty important the duration of time while the club is still swinging back that you can start to ramp up and start to apply force in the downswing direction. And that was, am I correct in saying that? Basically,
sounds reasonable.
Yeah. So, and where I'm getting that is really the graph that you shared with me, and one thing that has really been a huge thing for my coaching is clearly understanding when that contribution to the backswing starts to taper off and when do we actually start contributing in the downswing direction, right? So can you talk a little bit about, from a golfer standpoint, I hear a lot of things like, I've got to make this backswing, get to the top, and then a downswing. And, understanding how that's not at all the way it works has been really, really helpful in getting players to hit it further and feeling like they're not doing as much, feeling like they're not having to work as hard. So can you talk a little bit about really busting some conventions as far as like when in the backswing should we be starting to feel force into the club going the other direction?
Yeah, well, the it's about halfway back, when really things start to reverse from the ground, and even backswing clubhead speed peaks, kind of halfway back, and then that's when we start to reverse everything. And the ground has probably, the forces that we're applying in the ground have already changed into a downswing direction before that. I will say this, faster backswing might not work for everybody because you could screw up your transition sequence. So it's worth playing around with. So you want it because we're talking about, when do things reverse, when does the downswing start? Well, it's like different body parts are in the downswing while other body parts are in the backswing.
Yes.
Like I never, to me, without video camera, if someone's like, oh, take a look at my swing, what do you think? From a speed perspective, the first thing I look at, I'll stare at the lead hip. And as soon as I start to see transition happening in the lead hip, I immediately flip up to the club head. And if that club head isn't still moving backwards, or at least freeze frame for a split second in my eyes, then I don't like that swing. It's probably not one probably doesn't feel good to the player. That's kind of so the lower body's going first. To me, you can't screw up that transition sequence. Yeah. That's where Cameron Young, maybe he's trading 2 or 3 miles per hour, maybe even up to 5, if he really had a fast backswing. But his transition sequence is amazing, and he always gets to feel like that club gets like, no, I'll just give a second to like kind of put it in the slot, and man, that's great. But probably not great if you're 65 and your club head speed is peaked at 92 miles an hour. Hey, let's not pause at the top. It's probably worth trying to get those few more miles per hour and still have a good transition sequence. While having a little bit more up-tempo backswing. And another interesting thought on this is you see a lot of people, including long drive guys, generate higher club head speed if you do like a pre-swing first, like make a short little forward swing, so the club gets out like 3-4 feet in front of the ball, and then you whip it back, right? Mm-hmm. Well, where does that come from? Why would that be more advantageous? You can, it's interesting to ask these questions. Why would that be more advantageous than feeling like you aggressively make a fast backswing from the ball? Yeah. Why does this kind of more of a lazy feeling where you're like, I'm going to put it out and then swing it back? Even though the backswing speed might not be faster, right? Why does that seem to generate more speed? Well, the reason is because in order to generate a downswing, you have to shut off the backswing muscles. Yep. Okay? And the golf swing, it all happens in a very quick period of time. So I've got my, internal, external obliques, let's just say. And I got the ones that are doing the backswing, they got to turn off, and then I got to turn on the downswing ones. Well, if I do that pre-swing to get it, the club out in front of me, I get to generate sufficient backswing speed much earlier into the backswing. So I'm only a few feet behind the ball, and I'm already cooking to get me whipped up around and behind. That gives me much more time to shut off the backswing muscles and then engage the downswing muscles.
Fascinating.
If I start at the ball and I go, okay, I got to generate a lot of backswing speed, so I got to fire up those backswing muscles, and they're still active, and then I'm like, quick, shut them off. Mm-hmm. And that's a big separator between elite athletes and non-elite athletes. It's not just about rate of force development, being able to ramp up the force in the muscle quickly. The best athletes can shut off muscles really quickly. Right. And that's something that you can train. That's something that there's some genetics involved with. That's, when you're sprinting and you have to go quick, hamstring on, hamstring off, quad on, it's like the ability to turn muscles off is just as important as the ability to turn them on quickly. But for us mortals, that pre-swing gives us a little bit more time to turn them off.
It's interesting how you're describing, because I think one of the things that Robbie and I try to describe to golfers, just any level of golfer, is there's no one. There's a convention that there's a way to swing the club. There's a way to swing the club, and that's not true, right? There's lots of ways to swing the club. There's lots of ways to create speed. There's lots of ways to create force. And I think it's interesting because we kind of heard some stories about your work with Matthew Fitzpatrick, right? So he comes to you and says, here's a world-class player who's already phenomenal at golf. And he comes to you and he says, I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to add this skill, this speed skill to my game. I'm going to guess that you didn't say, here's exactly how you're going to do it. I'm going to guess that you and he explored some options for his speed. I'm just guessing. But could you kind of describe how, for the listener, because I think it'd be fascinating, how did you and he take on this plan of adding the speed? Because, it's been a phenomenal thing for him and obviously propelled him to a U.S. Open championship. So I think it'd be really fun to hear about how that took place.
Yeah, it was primarily through his coach. Mike reached out to me, and he just wants the best out of Matt. He's super humble. There's lots of coaches who might like want to talk to me and then learn something and then never mention to anybody or even the player that maybe I provide some. That's not Mike. Mike's awesome. So you got Matt, who's 25, 26. He's been swinging the club like 112 miles an hour. He's had a bit of a university career. He's turned pro. Like, this guy leaves no stone unturned. Presumably, he's been doing things to help increase his club head speed. Maybe even just getting, maturing as an adult male, right? But hey, he's stuck at 112, 113. He's top 20 player in the world, and is winning DP World Tour events, knocking on the door in some PGA Tour events, but they go play these majors, which is his next step. You got to win some majors, and the majors tend to be longer, and he just probability. He knows he likes the numbers, looks at them, he's like, I can't compete. I can't hit Augusta number 11. I can't be hitting 4-iron in, and DJ's hitting a 9-iron.
Yeah,
probability is just gonna win out. Over 4 rounds. So I did ask a lot of questions. First, probably a 2 or 3 hour-long conversations with his coach, Mike Walker, and it was like, things like, what have you tried working on for speed? What does he usually feel when he doesn't hit his driver well? What type of ball flight does he like?
Good question.
What things have you tried that he hated? A million things. And then when I met with Matt, I wanted to see what he was doing in the gym. Wanted to watch him warm up, watch him hit balls, and ask him a lot of those questions. What do you feel when you hit bad shots? Do you feel in your hands? Do you feel like your lower body stalls out? I don't know. A million things, right? I want to get a full picture, and I've got a plan. We got 4 things to change, right? That's it. Those 4 things. And I can go, okay, let's take a look at, can we increase the length of his hand path, right? So there's a whole series of questions that I asked to see if that's something we could do, and then, okay, I'll give you an example of like I'm crossing things out. These are not going to work. And then even from a ground reaction forces perspective. So I like working energy when you're talking about putting energy into the club. Mm-hmm. I like using impulse momentum, not to completely overwhelm everybody who's listening. No. It's just a different way of looking at the world. Impulse momentum is still Newton's laws, but it uses time instead of distance. So force times time produces an impulse that changes angular momentum. You kind of need to use that when you're talking about how you get speed from the ground, because you can't get any energy from the ground. Some people are like, of course you get energy from the ground. You can't. I deal with reality. I need things to add up with equations. And you can use semantics and say, the ground's a big power source. That doesn't work. Semantically, you can say that if you want. Okay, great, I get it, but it's wrong. Right. And I can't calculate that. I can't go, how much power do you get from the ground? You get 0, because in order to get to do work or to get energy from something, there needs to be movement at the point of force application. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen. The point where the ground's touching your foot, that doesn't move with the foot. If you're in a trampoline, you get some energy from the trampoline. But what works really good is impulse momentum. You apply forces into the ground, your muscles contract, your feet push into the ground pushes back. And if the force from the ground, if it doesn't pass through your center of mass, hopefully it doesn't, that adds angular momentum into the system. Right. And it's helpful to have more angular momentum into the system. You need a certain amount, a minimum amount, to get club head speed. You don't need to maximize it, but you need to get some angular momentum into the system from the ground, and then hopefully you can get as much of that angular momentum out to the club as you can to increase club head speed. So that's one thing we looked at. His ground reaction force mechanics aren't optimal. He's not getting as much angular momentum in the system as he possibly could, but it's not something you want to maximize, right? And in particular, his frontal plane torques weren't great. He wasn't getting a big separation between the ground reaction force vector and center of mass. But there's a lot of things in order to make that happen that make him feel uncomfortable. It's not stuff that he wanted to do in his swing. So that's off the list. He was 19th in strokes gained off the tee. So he's one of the best drivers of the golf ball on the planet. And the last thing I want to do is screw that up.
Right.
So if you're working with the average amateur, and they got some really bad things going. They're a 20 handicap, and there's some really bad things. Their grip's terrible. They're finishing on their back foot, and you're like, look, we got to work on some big things here. Yeah. They might hit a terrible drive on hole 1, finish on their back foot. Maybe it felt comfortable to them. I'm okay with them going to the next tee box, needing to do something not comfortable for them in order to generate a better golf swing.
Right.
I don't think that's a great option for a tour player who's ranked 19th in the world in strokes gained off the tee. I think the onus is on me because there's lots of options. I don't need Matt Fitzpatrick swinging 140 miles an hour, right? I need him swinging at low 120s, right? We need to get the ball speed close to 180. That's going to optimize his strokes gained off the tee. Once ball speed starts getting beyond that, you need to be crazy accurate to optimize your strokes gained off the tee. So that means that I don't need to maximize the amount of angular momentum in the system from the ground. I just need enough. Yep. And so it wasn't worth starting to do things to get more of that into the system. It wasn't something he was going to be comfortable with. So I settled on, let's see if we can get the amount of angular momentum you have in the system right now is probably sufficient. Let's get a little bit more out to the club. And we worked on increasing the average force on the hand path. And, one of the simplest things we did. So then it becomes, a bit of a science to try and figure out the communication. So I need to know how he communicates with his coach, Mike. And Mike is super helpful for this, And, 'cause when a golfer says something, it might not be exactly what he means or he's feeling, so Mike was super helpful in that translation. So what I did was, long story short, one of the things that really helped was, all right, he really liked at the time to see the ball fade, right? So he needs to have the path moving left through impact, the face a little bit open to the path. And so I said, all right, I want you to hit some big draws for me. He's awesome. Of course he can hit draws, right? So he's hitting some draws. I'm like, all right, I want you to start to think about what that feels like end to backswing into transition. Like I want that kind of draw feeling. And he used the phrase like pathing it to the right. All right, I want this path. Like, can you get this path like 7 or 8 out to the right for me? Oh yeah, no problem. You're slinging draws. I'm like, okay. Now I want you to think about when you take the club back, you're hitting a draw. You start to transition, it's a draw. Immediately after you transition, I need the path left. I need you. This ball flight needs to fade, and you can't. I still need you releasing hard.
Yep.
I don't want none of these wimpy hold off, weak wipey fades. Right. I want you ripping that face closed like a full release. You got to get the path left. And that was my way of increasing the average force along the whole hand path. Because if he's playing a fade, if his path is already left and just getting to rip more left at the bottom, that just creates this unplayable slice almost, right?
Yeah.
So I can't just add force along the hand path at the bottom. How do we get him to add force on the hand path at the top? And the more external that you can have a thought, in my opinion, the better off you are, as opposed to telling him to do stuff with his body. Hey, I want the club head pathing out to the right through impact. I don't really care what you're doing with your body to do that.
Yes.
But in order to think right, to get the club moving more out, you need more force along the hand path early, because the hand path is going out, in that first part of the downswing. And then now I need you to rip that thing as hard as you can to the left. So we get a little bit more ball speed, a little bit more club head speed, went from 112 to 116 in that session. And then that's where the stack kind of comes in, where it's like, okay, we got these cool swing thoughts, let's reinforce it with some speed training.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's so good.
Yeah. So good. And now he's up to What's his club speed now? I mean, it's fast. I saw it the other day. Some update from Stack.
When he was peak Stack training, and really focused on the speed. Like after the U.S. Open, his club head speed average at the Tour Championship was 121.
That's pretty awesome.
That's good.
Yeah, so he went from 112 to 121. Yeah, wow. It was awesome. And so now it's you also need to play at 121 and maximize your strokes gained. You generate like low 180 ball speed. I think his ball speed average for that tournament was 181. You need to be super straight.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about
Correct.
maximizing strokes gained. So what's interesting is you always want to maintain that capacity to like crank it up and generate those 180 ball speeds. But you also need to realize that, hey, maybe if you're not hitting it super straight, that it's okay to be down around 176, 77 ball speed, right? If your current face-to-path variability is a nudge higher for whatever reason,
right,
then it's probably not optimal to be, swinging at 122. Maybe you need to dial it down to 117 or something,
So you're not hitting it longer into the woods, essentially.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But you'd never want to lose that capacity.
Correct.
Because if all of a sudden your variability starts to get tighter and you're, feeling in the groove, then that's what's impressive about, Bryson. Rory's ramped up his ball speed lately, is that you can't really play awesome golf at, 190 ball speed. That's where kind of Bryson's sitting, and Rory's pushing, up to mid 180s.
Yeah.
Schauffele did an amazing job of this at the PGA Championship. Like, if you're getting those ball speeds and you're maximizing your strokes gained, you are straight. You are a really accurate driver.
Yeah. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, Doctor, how are you doing on time? Do you have time for a couple more?
Sure.
So, again, one or two more conventions that we want to debunk, and then I have a follow-up question on this next convention would be the idea of swinging on plane. All right, so I've got to swing the club on a certain plane because I'm going to be more repeatable. What are your thoughts on this kind of like long-held convention, and kind of what have you found when it comes to that?
Yeah, there's not much there. All you have to do is, you don't need to dig too much into the research. Just go Jim Furyk,
Right.
like Matt Wolf, and then even into some of my research that shows, you actually want the center mass of the club. It can be very helpful to not having it move in the same plane that the hands are moving in. You can create some scenarios that facilitate squaring of the face. And, the vast majority of tour players that I look at, and this is, one of the things that I get the most from better tour players, like the reason why I end up working with them, through their coach or through someone they've gone to see is, this off-plane relationship. Mm-hmm. It's real easy to coach someone out of that if you're going for an aesthetic look on a camera, right?
Right.
And so it's, there are some facts. Once you generate a ton of club head speed from about shaft parallel to shaft parallel through the ball, the club head does move pretty planar,
Right.
Yeah, okay, but before that, it's you just look at all the swing traces.
Yeah.
These things are limping all over the place, So there's really no benefit to having it try and be planar. There's certainly a benefit that I can see to creating some off-plane relationships.
And that's where that video that I was talking about, somebody posted it as the most important, because I think that it destroyed some of those conventions. And also, I think what you and Chris do pretty well in that video, which is probably just put together pretty quickly with the two of you, was describing how the club actually wants to square up. And this is something that's always fascinated me. Like, I teach with TrackMan, right? I've done 10,000 plus lessons using TrackMan. And so I'm looking at degrees of the face angle. And it doesn't, even for not great players, doesn't deviate a ton if they're swinging it pretty well. And you think about how that is even happening, right? And so this feeling of being able to get the club, get the center of mass off the plane a little bit so that it squares more. I don't know what the word you use in there, passively in a way.
I call it a passive torque. It comes from robotics, and folks that have above knee amputations. So someone who's got no muscles crossing the leg, if they get above the knee amputation, there's no muscles crossing they can still swing their lower leg. So there's still a torque acting to create the lower leg to swing. And the term comes from robotics because you have robots doing that same thing. It applies to these prosthetic limbs because there's no muscles actively powering directly at that joint rotation.
Right.
There are forces through the joint that create this passive torque.
Yeah. It's fascinating. We'll link the video just for people to check that out because it's, I think, a powerful thing for people to watch and destroy maybe a convention about.
Yeah.
That was the point I was making about everything was in. We were filming video. We were filming video in 2D for so long to teach people that these straight lines became in play and that became the thing, right? Like this on plane look. And whenever I watched your thing and thought about it and conceptualized what I do, I think about things and try them. I gained so much club head speed for myself, like instantaneously. Like it was crazy. I mean, I gained a club of distance in a week, and I was like, "This is crazy." And so it's helped me as a player tremendously, but also obviously as a coach because just the understand, even the very basic understanding of that, or just allowing that to happen, right, in a way that's allowing students to maybe be more of themselves in the swing, as opposed to saying, no, this is what you need to do. This is it. This is this picture. This is this line. And a lot of people didn't react to that very well, right? So I just thought it was a phenomenal addition to the golf instruction world. Thank you, Sasho. So huge.
And then what are some ways that you see coaches maybe misinterpret that information and maybe coach it in a way that isn't actually creating the desired effect that you found in your research? If you can maybe share a couple things that you would want to make sure that the coaches out there, when they hear this, okay, I want to get the club center mass, do you call it behind or below the hand,
below
the
the
hand
force
pass
vector?
Yep. So like
A little technical for a podcast.
that's our intent, right? That's what we're trying to do as a coach. Wow. We're trying to give them that facilitating of squaring the face. What are some ways that you found that coaches maybe misinterpret that or maybe try to apply it in maybe a not great way?
Well, I'd also say that I think just before I answer, like maybe the internet trend of so much shallowing, do you think it started with that conversation? I think it did, right? I think it started with that conversation, and then all this shallowing stuff started happening. And so I guess that kind of plays off Robbie's question for you there about all the misinterpretation potentially.
Yeah, it's about the relationship between the force vector. So you pull on the grip. You apply force to the grip, and then there's you can literally picture an arrow coming out. That's the direction of force. As long as the center mass is below that early in the downswing, then that relationship exists, and that's going to help the forearm, lead forearm supinate, and because the club's attached to the forearm, that kind of helps the face square a little bit. I know it's tough on a podcast.
We're on YouTube. I just showed it for the listener.
But the whole swing can be really steep or really flat to create that relationship. So you could just make a really flat swing, but not create this relationship. But then you're just hitting massive blocks. But you could have a really steep swing and still create that relationship, and no problem. It's not a big deal. Carl Patterson has a swing, if you want to look at someone that looks steep but creates this relationship beautifully. I'm not sure if he's still playing a little bit on the Champions Tour or not. But then you've got, if you understand the relationship, I think that someone like Gankas, who goes extreme in flat positions, but the guy's a really good coach, and people play really well, using that. But he's taking that principle. I'm sure he'd say that. Yeah, he'd say, watch Sasha's video. He might have been coaching this stuff long before ever see my video, but at least it's like, oh, I understand what's the physics of what's going on here.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think he can use that principle. I mean, it's clear, like, that's exactly what's happening. You know, that's you know, that relationship is a fundamental of some of his coaching. But, you know, also he having, say, like, let's call it a Genka style mechanics, the one that he popularizes, you know, online. It's just because you have a good recipe, it might be tough for another coach if they don't, you know, shadow George and spend a lot of time with him to get all the details of the, you know, the recipe right. You could have a great chef, and like, here's the recipe. It's like, yeah, but you still gotta do it. Communicate with the person. Realize, oh, you know what, this pan's hotter than I thought. I got to mix things up a little bit, or you know what I mean?
So, no doubt.
So I'm not saying he's teaching bad stuff or good stuff or whatever. I mean, I kind of like what he's teaching, but I think that it might not just be the method, but it's like, it would be, you know, George makes it work, and that's what I'm trying to say. There's some people that definitely have said, oh, let's just get flatter, but they didn't have all the other pieces that George is able to kind of add in there, you know. So it's not just about getting laid off. It's not just about
not about that at all.
Would there be like a really quick and easy sort of like exercise you might have someone do, maybe just to explore that, not even on the golf course or on a range, but just to start to feel what that relationship would do? Yeah.
I like lead arm only swings, you know, and you know, if you put that club, like, go above the plane, you know, so if you're if you kind of tilt it, you're like, okay, it looks on plane, let's crank it above the plane, and then pull your hand down to make a swing. You feel it's this terrible sensation that the face, like, you know, rotates open, and you're like, oh, you can't, with one hand, you can't even fight it, you know. And what I do is I would almost make the club be perfectly vertical. Do you know what I mean? So you exaggerate it. But in a one-handed swing, what I would call the moment arm, so the distance between the force vector and the center mass of the club is larger than it is. But you do see some really high handicap slicers that get the club out there, and it must feel terrible in their hand.
Absolutely.
But there's these one-arm swings, the force is low, moment arm's big, and you get this terrible sensation. On the golf swing, when you're cranking on the handle, it doesn't take much if that center mass is a little bit above. We've all had that feeling where it's like, man, something happens and the ball just takes off, big slice. Maybe it's even a bit of a block, and you're like, how it felt like this club was just someone else was on the other end twisting it in your hands, you know? Yes. And that's the bad way to get that relationship going versus, you know, basically every golf instructor that's, you know, talked about, oh, you feel like the club is slotting nicely, you know? Mm-hmm. That's that feeling where you don't need to do it. You don't feel like you don't need to do a ton. The face is going to, you just worry about generating speed, and the face seems to kind of close. That you're not like, you don't have to feel like you're twisting on the grip to shut the face. It's just, you know, it's just going to kind of close, you know, and then you can work then to manage, you know, how hard you rip to the left. You can manage how fast that face closes. You know, you can kind of stabilize it. You don't necessarily need to feel like you're holding it off. You know, it's going to close, you know, without much effort from you, and you can kind of, you know, it's easier to work the ball from there, I think.
No question. Totally agree.
All right, so we've got one more. Thank you so much for your time, Sasho. This one's going to be for our coaches. So, is there anything that you're seeing when it comes to the rate of change of some of these impact variables that could have some merit for golfers and coaches out there?
Not really, but still looking, and it seems like a reasonable theory.
Yeah.
You know, so because it kind of seems good, seems logical and intuitive, and there's not much to you know, from a face validity standpoint, like in your face, like, no, this doesn't make sense. So if it seems to make sense, probably worth still looking at, you know, but nothing's really shaken out yet.
Okay.
You know, like if you look at like just rate of closure, even forget about just rate of closure as a function of time, you have players like Victor Hovland who have crazy low rates of closure, but there are players like that have a higher rate of closure, but their face to path variability is similar. And someone like Hovland leads you down that path like, oh, it's a good thing because he's awesome ball striker and really good, and he's got this super low rate of closure. But there are other people higher rates of closure, and they still do pretty well. So then so one of the ways to look at it was well, maybe we shouldn't be looking at it as degrees per second because that's automatically going to go up with club head speed. Let's look at it as degrees per foot, and that's a little more intuitive. It's like, hey, okay, at impact, if this thing was closing at the same speed it's closing at now, and we traveled a foot, how many degrees would it close? So something like 10 degrees would be super low. Some people get all the way up to 24 degrees per foot. And then you mention, same idea with path, rate of path change. Can you reduce that? If you have a longer flat spot and the club's traveling in a more linear direction for a longer period of time and, things get out of whack, then, hey, your outcome's going to be better, And, spent a lot of time with Chris talking about this, and also with Ping's got a great data set because they got a lot of tour players and looking at it 10 ways, all different angles. It's not an easy thing to measure. Rate of closure is not so bad. Rate of path change is quite difficult, especially where we're interested in it down near the ball. It's not obvious to people, but if you're measuring rate of path change, you're really talking about accelerations, and accelerations are super messy. I don't want to maybe get too far into the weeds, but in order to have a really good sense of acceleration, you need data before and after a point in time. Example I would give is imagine the three of us are driving cars into a brick wall. And we're all going the three of us, we're all going exactly 100 miles an hour, right? And acceleration, if you want to accelerate, you either hit the brake or hit the gas, right? That would change our velocity. Acceleration is a change in velocity. And we get 2 inches from the brick wall, right? And how most of the systems like Enzo or the motion capture system in my lab, how you measure speed is you get positions from the data. And then you go, right, how much has that position changed over time? And that gives you a speed. And then you're like, right, well, I want to get an acceleration. So you're like, well, what was the velocity at this point? And then what was the velocity at this point? And how much did that change by you getting acceleration? So imagine we're filming the cars as they're heading into that wall, the three of us. Well, Robbie Chicken's out and he hammers on the brake, right? But he's 2 inches away. So he gets a massive negative acceleration, right?
Yeah.
I don't do anything. I just coast in at 100. I don't touch the brake or the gas. And Eric's like, I'm going through the wall. He hits the accelerator, and his acceleration goes massive. Mm-hmm. Well, then we slam into the wall, and the data's noisy. I don't know. We can't tell. But imagine now if we remove the wall. Just as we do those things, the wall disappears, and now we can see, Robbie's velocity dropped. It went from 100 down to 95 in a couple of frames. And mine didn't do anything. Mine stayed at 100, right? And then we see Eric's increased to 105. Now that we have that information, we can figure out what was the acceleration at the wall, right? The golf ball is the wall, and it messes things up.
That makes sense.
Chaos.
Yeah.
Boom. So it's like to get really accurate accelerations, and I do experiments all the time that seem wacky because the ball filtering out ball impact and trying to know exactly what's going on is tough. So I'll do things like have people hit balls. I did this with Corey Bacon at Ping, and he, it wasn't really fair to him, but he was a good trooper about it. So what you do is you're like, you can hurt yourself if you're not careful. I wanted to make sure that I was calculating stuff really accurately. Rate of path change was one of the things, right? Okay, and you have to do some filtering to get good information on that. So he's hitting balls, and he's got a stock 7-arm. We know, 98 mile an hour club head speed, and he's got this ball flight dialed in. Then we go, right, let's close your eyes. He's hitting it off a tee, right? Actually, it was a little folded up business card, right? So there's no ground contact. So he's nipping these things. Then let's see if you can do it blindfolded. So you set up a baseline where he's doing these things blindfolded and we're getting the same ball flight, right? So he can hit balls blindfolded. There's no problem. Actually, it wasn't blindfolded. It was closed his eyes, but it was clear that his eyes were closed, right? So just close his eyes, make some swings. Then, unbeknownst to him, Eric Henriksen, who's kind of running the test, as soon as Corey starts his backswing with one of these random eyes closed trials, he grabs the ball. So then Corey makes this air swing exactly like he would make a real swing. And, without the ball taking 20% of the speed out of the club, he's like, oh, it kind of like he wasn't prepared. Yeah. He didn't, his body, if you're swinging the stack, it's no problem. There's no ball there and you can prepare yourself. But we got some awesome data to actually calculate those accelerations to look at, a few different things, Anyway, and I've done this different times, done this with putting. With putter head acceleration, it's like, hey, am I actually measuring what I think I'm measuring? Because I got to filter out impact. So I would do the exact same thing with people. Putting balls with your eyes closed, right? So your stroke stays the same, and then randomly pull the ball away. So you make the putting stroke the way you would normally make it, but there's no ball there, so you can actually see. Okay, like without the ball getting in the way, or what is the acceleration actually going on? So put a lot of faith in a Capto or a Sam. Sam's got a sensor on the shaft, right? Shit gets noisy when you hit the ball, and it's on the shaft, not on the club head. And we're doing some filtering, and we're saying we know what club head acceleration is. Look, maybe they've done a great job, and it's actually the case. So I don't know, but I know what I do in my lab to make sure that I'm getting acceleration right. And they get some smart people. Maybe it's great. I'm not putting any shade on them. I'm just saying that it's not easy.
Right.
Yeah. So we're thinking there might be something there, but it hasn't come out yet. We still don't really know.
Right. Okay. And where, what Chris would say is, he's got some teaching philosophies that, some things that he likes to see, some preferences, and, kind of creating a flat spot is one of them. But he'd be the first to admit that, hey, maybe in having people do these things that are creating a flat spot, I'm actually, the reason why they're playing better is something else that's going along with that.
They're just improving their club face, right? They're improving the strike location. So it's
right.
It's
so
tricky to know if that's exactly.
Yeah.
Cause or effect.
Maybe the spot is getting flatter, but that's just a symptom, of all the other stuff, a good symptom maybe, or inconsequential maybe, of all the other stuff that he's getting the players to do. But he's had some pretty good results.
Yeah, I would say so.
Decent.
Decent. Yeah.
Well, Doctor, that's all I've got. Eric, anything else?
Just thank you for spending
so
time.
much.
We really, really appreciate it. I think there was a lot of nuggets there for people to learn. So what we always want is what's the epiphany for the listener? I think it's explore. Don't have too many conventions. If something comes up that seems different than what you believe, explore it a little bit. Dr. Sasha said that, explore things, try it out. Like you said with the faster backswing, mess around with it. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. I think that's just kind of how coaching should be. That's how playing should be. That's how we learn things, right? We explore our options and see how we do. So thank you for doing what you do.
I think one of the philosophies that I always take is, it's helpful to be your harshest critic. So before I usually put anything out there, I'm trying to debunk it, and I'm never personally offended by hey, if someone says hey, I think putter head acceleration really matters in putting. Well, it's not me personally. It's not a personal thing, right? I'm like, no, you're going to offend me if you're if you've got data the other way. Great, I just want to see it, and then we can. I'll show you what I've done and how I've approached it. Maybe I've messed up something. That's great. I'll pivot in 2 seconds. I'll be the first person beating the drum of hit zero acceleration. Let's do it.
And that's how it should go, right? Peer review, people, and I think in our space, Robbie and I's space, it's like people love to argue about it. They get so offended if you disagree with them, and I think that's just crazy. So I think no one gets better that way, really.
Yeah.
So we should be always open-minded, always growth-minded, and then we're open to moments where we see things that change our convention. It can really impact our lives and make us better. And we got to be ready. That's where mindset comes into play, right? Like I got to be ready for that moment. And if I'm not ready for that moment, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, like look, here's an idea I have about putting. Let's set it over here, and all three of us will attack it.
Yep.
You're not attacking me.
Right.
I'm happy to attack this. Now I might if you say some stuff about this idea, and I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true. You're not helping me get to the truth because I don't really believe what you're saying, about this. If you're just, going to say, well, no, it really matters if you hit it off the toe. I'm like, yeah, okay, but not many people hit it that far off the toe. So let's maybe find another way to attack this idea. Mm-hmm. Let's find some better evidence. Yeah. But you're not attacking me.
No.
Yeah.
No. Let's all go after the idea, but in a way that's genuine. Yeah.
Well, that's where teaching with data comes into play, right, for us, using TrackMan or other things. It's like it's not our philosophy anymore. It's not our theory. It's like it's gone from philosophy to science, and it's not really arguable. So I think that helps the student learn a lot, too. And so that's helping. That's just helping. I think people are going to play I think people are already playing better golf, like across the masses of people that play golf. And you help with that. So thank you. That's why we wanted to have you on the show.
Thank you.
For sure.
Cool. Thanks for having me on.